Okay, so yeah, welcome to this panel. And thank you everybody for being here. My name is Serrano, and I am postdoctoral researcher at the University of Groningen in the north of Netherlands. And I will be the moderator and chair. I will be chairing this panel, challenges and practical implications of decommodifications, part 2. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this amazing event, as well as those volunteers who are doing an incredible job at coordinating and solving the problems we might encounter during the panels. I would like to especially thank our technical moderator, Kanza Marie, who will be helping us with technical issues that we might have. And well, since most of you might have already participated in other panels, I'd just like to remind you that if you have any questions that you would like to ask, formulate, you can do it on the chat section on the right side of your screen. And during the discussion, well, after the discussion, I will try to put together those questions and formulate them to the speakers. Since we will have plenty of time, I think discussion can be smooth. So I guess feel free, please, to ask your questions, and I really encourage you to do that. I will start now by introducing each of the panelists today. Maybe you can see in the program that there were 4 panelists, but we are actually today we only have 3 of them. Raquel Azebedo could not be in this panel, but well, let me just introduce first Joseph Vaessen. Joseph Vaessen is PhD student in sociology at the University of Louvain in Belgium. His research is about volunteering in Belgium, which is actually a legal status. The aim of his research is to understand how this status is mobilized by organizations, and mainly also to research on what are the meanings of volunteering for volunteers themselves. He's doing his research under the supervision of Professor Marc Zoon and Isabel Ferreras. Then Kateryna Novikova is PhD in sociology. She's a researcher and translator. She teaches sociology, intercultural communication, international labor market, and diversity in organizations at the SVPS, University of Humanities and Social Sciences in Warsaw. Her research interests focus on digital sociology, agency, community, and complexity, and digital work and its media representations. Finally, Joshua Preiss is professor of philosophy and director of the program in philosophy, politics, and economics at the Minnesota State University. His research is in social and political philosophy, political economy, applied ethics, and the philosophy of economics. He has recently published the monography Just Work for All, The American Dream in the 20th Century, which just came out by Routledge Press. Okay, so thank you very much. And Joseph, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone for being online. I will share my PowerPoint with you. Oops. Okay, perfect. So the structure of my presentation today, my presentation will be structured in 5 points. So firstly, I will simply go back to the question asked in this presentation. Secondly, I will briefly present the legal status of volunteering in Belgium and its position in relation to labor law and to market logics. Thirdly, I will say a few words about the context in which I have studied the meanings of this status for the volunteers themselves, with 2 case studies in Belgium. And I will also say a word about the method I used. Then fourthly, based on the observation that a significant proportion of the people who volunteer in these organizations are job seekers, I will focus on the meanings of volunteering for these people in particular. And finally, based on the results, I will discuss whether or not the volunteer status is appropriate to their experiences and their expectations. And the idea is at the same time to see how the findings can contribute to think how to decommodify work. So, change the slide. My starting question, so my presentation today is guided by the following question. How volunteering and its meanings for job seekers support the thinking about the decommodification of work? First of all, about volunteering and the legal status of volunteering in Belgium, in order for you to understand what I'm talking about here, you need to know that the status of volunteer, which has been in force in Belgium since 2005, provides a framework for the activities defined as carried out without obligation, without remuneration, in non-profit organizations, and for the benefit of others. So in principle, this status is therefore totally outside the market logics, both regarding the organizations involved and the form of the activity, which is intended to be free and unpaid. And as a result of this, under Belgian law, volunteers are not considered as workers. So they have some protection, but there is no employment contract. And the applicability of labor regulations is not mentioned in the law, although several legal experts agree that labor regulations apply when authority is exercised over volunteers. And lastly, volunteers are not included in collective worker representation structures. I want also to say that for people of working age who are out of employment and who receive social benefit, in principle, they can volunteer, but they have to inform the institutions providing their benefits. And for people receiving unemployment benefit, volunteering may be prohibited if this activity is interpreted as restricting their availability for the labor market. So volunteering is therefore not considered as a work activity, either in law or by employment agencies. However, since 2019, there have been 2 amendments to the law on volunteering that indicate a certain shift towards market logics and a derogatory employment regime. The first concerns the deferral of volunteers by organizations, which is supposed to reimburse volunteers for the costs incurred by their activity, and is not considered as remuneration. However, there is a flat rate reimbursement that is allowed without justification, which is a maximum of €35 per day and about 1,400 euros per year. And in 2019, this maximum flat rate was increased to 1,800 euros per year for certain categories of volunteers. And more recently, in the context of the COVID crisis, volunteers working in so-called essential sectors were added to the volunteers eligible for this rule. But people who receive a social allowance are excluded from this increase of the maximum flat rate. So this volunteer status can also therefore potentially be used as a way of paying volunteers a small amount of money without tax. And the second change concerns the organizations that are allowed to engage volunteers. And during the pandemic, private companies providing care service for the elderly were temporarily allowed to engage volunteers. So the status of volunteer is therefore a rather ambiguous status, which is in principle outside the market logics, which is not even considered as work in legal terms and for employment agencies, but which could approach a derogatory employment regime. It is therefore, I think, an interesting object of research to study the vectors of decommodification, or on the contrary, new forms of commodification of work. So beyond the law, it is fundamental to listen to what volunteer status means to the people involved. And this is what I've been doing since 2020 with 2 case studies of very different volunteer involving organizations that have been at the heart of the response to the health crisis in Belgium. My first case study focused on the citizen service platform in Belgium, which is an organization that brings together adults aged from 18 to 25 in a voluntary program of so-called citizen services with the aim of social, civic, and professional activation. So it's a full-time program lasting 6 months where volunteers commit themselves to the profit of a non-profit organization in the sectors of assistance to people, culture, environment, or sport. And volunteers are defrayed with 200 euros per month for 6 months. And my second case study focused on the public hospital of Liège in Belgium also, which, like many other organizations during the crisis, called for volunteers during the pandemic. So this hospital launched a call for volunteers in October 2020 to support the hospital's support services, which were facing new needs due to the crisis and high staff absenteeism due to quarantines. And this call resulted in the involvement of 70 volunteers from October 2020 to March 2021, who committed themselves in a wide variety of ways, full-time or part-time, over long or short period. And the hospital defrayed the volunteers 35 euros per full day worked. And to carry out these 2 case studies, I mainly carried out comprehensive interviews, 35 interviews per case, partly with staff members of this organization, but mostly with volunteers, with 25 interviews per case. So now I will focus on the meanings of volunteers for job seekers, because one of the most interesting aspects of these 2 organizations is the significant proportion of volunteers who are job seekers. In the citizen service platforms, about 70% of the volunteers were job seekers when they joined the organization. And in the hospital, 40% of the volunteers who have been involved between October 2020 and March 2021 were unemployed as well. It is therefore essential to listen to what volunteering means to these people in particular, and bearing in mind that none of them told me that they had been forced to volunteer by agencies in charge of unemployment. On the contrary, these agencies sometimes hold them back. About the volunteers of the citizen service platform, the organization concerned presents mainly volunteers as they present volunteering as a civic commitment, guided by the desire to provide a service to the community. But the involvement in the program is mainly linked to the volunteers' difficulties in finding a place in education programs, or in particular for job seekers in finding employment. For job seekers, volunteering appears to be a substitute activity in the context of difficult job search. These volunteerings are seeking mainly to first have an activity, find something to do, as they say, to discover an environment full of experience, and to orient themselves professionally. And the flat rate defrayal of 200 euros per month does not enter into account in their initial reasons for joining the program. As for the experience of volunteering, many of them associate their volunteering with a form of work, even if it is not a job. So they consider themselves to be workers, like the members of the organization teams. And beyond characterizing or not their volunteering as a form of work, which may be subject to some ambiguities, several dimensions of their experience lead to its association with an experience that is at least pre-professional, which implies responsibilities, a rhythm of work since it's full-time, and which requires a certain rigor. And the lack of remuneration appears to be a concern for volunteers only when it is necessary, so to make their basic needs, or as a concern to be valued, recognized for the work they do. And at the end of the program, the main achievement of their volunteering is the development of self-confidence, both in terms of discovering their abilities through experience and in terms of recognizing the usefulness of their contribution within the host organization. Now about the volunteers of the Liège Hospital. The hospital presents mainly volunteering as guided by the solidarity and the desire to help the hospital in a crisis situation, but the initial motives of unemployed volunteers are relatively similar to those of the citizen service volunteers. For them, it is firstly and mainly a question of having an activity and feeling useful, and not to support the hospital in crisis. And concerning their experience of volunteering, the job-seeking volunteers associate their volunteering with a form of work, involving the same task of the employees on site, as well as a sense of responsibility towards the organization. And moreover, while they are free to define their working days as they wish, it is striking that most volunteers who are job seekers involve themselves full-time, or as much as possible if they are in training at the same time. Unlike the other volunteers, non-job seekers who tend to involve themselves part-time in order for them to preserve their freedom. And three elements seems to contribute to maintain their involvement. First, being part of a working team. Second, hoping to obtain a job at the end of their volunteering, and receiving the daily defray. But this is only for volunteers in an economically precarious situation. Therefore, like the volunteers of the citizen service, this is not a primary concern, except to cover basic needs or as a way of recognizing the work done. So what can we learn from these two case studies? I would say two main things. The first is that for job seekers, volunteering is often associated with work because they don't have a job. And the second thing is that motivations of job seekers to carry out an activity are expressive before an economic, and the proof being that some of them are even ready to work unpaid in order to have an activity, to have a feeling of usefulness, to discover, to be included in a group, or to orientate themselves. So to conclude, I would like to discuss briefly the results with regard to the principle of decommodification. Firstly, concerning the position of volunteering in relation to the logic of private profit, volunteering is in principle out of reach since it is exercised in non-profit organizations. However, as I've shown, there may be a shift towards the mobilization of this status by private companies, as it was the case during the pandemic. And decommodification, of course, implies keeping volunteering out of private companies, even in time of crisis, so that it does not serve as unpaid work feeding a profit-making logic. Secondly, it is quite questionable that case services concerning health, assistance to people, environment, that are not covered by the market because they are not economically profitable, are largely taken on by volunteers who are actually looking for a job, and for many of them associate their volunteering to a form of work without being recognized as such in terms of protection, remuneration, and social status. So decommodification implies not associating volunteering some activities that could be subject of a worker status, since they are full-time activities, fulfilling essential services, and the job seekers doing them associate their volunteering to a form of work for lack of a job. And thirdly, if we take seriously the experiences of these job seekers who volunteer in essential services, we see that their work expectations are mainly expressive and not economic. As I already said, for them it is mainly a question of getting an activity, feeling useful, being included in a group, discovering an environment, or orientate themselves. And the economic dimension comes into play as a matter of recognition, or for people in difficulty in order to meet their basic needs. Either as a break for volunteer, as I observed in the citizen service context, where daily defray is 10 euro, or as a support for volunteering, as I observed in the hospital context, where the daily defray is 35 euro. And this deeply challenges the management of unemployment based on market logics, considering only a labor market as providing work, or, for instance, considering the reduction of unemployment benefits as an incentive for the unemployed to work. This doesn't match the expectation of the people I met. And now to really conclude, I think my results feed the interest of proposals such as the job guarantee, which is widely discussed in this forum. And to be very clear, my point here is not to suggest that we should simply replace volunteer activities with employment, but to make a better distinction between what is volunteering and what can be a form of work by creating appropriate statuses that can meet the expectations of job seekers in particular. And I think this would reduce ambiguities of volunteering by removing practices that come to associate it with a form of work for lack of employment on the labor market. Thank you.
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I would like now to invite Katia Novikova to present, if it's fine.
Yes, I'm trying to. Can you hear me?
The sound quality is not very good, I must say. Maybe you can come close to the microphone.
Yes, and can you see my?
No, are you attempting to share your screen now?
Yes. And
since we didn't have too much time to talk about technical things before, do you want, maybe you can send your PowerPoint to me, and then I will just turn the slides for you if you want.
Oh, I don't know. It shows that you are sharing, and I don't know why it doesn't share here. Okay, so while trying to send you this PowerPoint, I will start. The topic is solidarity and knowledge sharing in the freelance work. I don't know what it was. So the idea of this research on knowledge sharing among freelancers, among freelance translators, in fact, appeared 5 years ago when I was for a moment freelance translator myself while being also an academic teacher. I did my translating job for 1 year. It was very interesting experience. However, I did also the research, and the research was particularly finished, and then COVID-19 came, COVID pandemic. I supplemented it with additional observations and interviews, and it was rather interesting. So my main point, or maybe not point, but the research field was the virtual community of translators in Poland. Freelancers mainly, they are also portfolio workers. They are usually self-employed or small entrepreneurs. Sometimes they are full-time employed. Considering their flexible work timetable and changing places of work, they are characterized by such specificity of work, such as cooperation with multiple partners, lack of strong connections with any particular organization, and therefore lack of sort of fellow support. In fact, the translators all over the world use some sort of virtual communities for some time already. However, translators here in Poland have developed remarkable online community. It was really interesting for me to join it and to make this first observations and then interviews. I used a couple of, I think I just describe the communities and then come to my some preliminary, preliminary conclusions. All communities represent private, visible, and general Facebook groups. I researched 3 communities: general communities for Ukrainian and Russian translators, Russian language translators. The general group is the largest, and it has 27,000 members. It was found
Okay, so it seems that she lost connection. Let's see if she can join us in 1 or 2 minutes. Otherwise, we can go on with maybe Joshua Preiss' presentation.
I can go whenever, just if you want me to go, and then Phil pick her back up at the end, whatever works best.
Let's give her 1 or 2 more minutes, just because she just started, and maybe let's see if we can. Okay, so I don't. Now she's here again. She should have access now to the main screen. Yeah. Okay. So you were interrupted. You lost connection. So can you?
Yeah. I used the notion of Randall Collins' interaction rituals and found out that despite some elements of utilitarian communication practices in this community, there are many new forms and rules that redefine relations and among those various types of users, introducing new kinds of rituals and reveal various knowledge sharing practices and solidarity related elements in various examples. So, for example, sorry for such maybe not that organized presentations. I'm stressed with technical things. Knowledge sharing activities are based on such rules as first, the clear rule that if you give one post and somebody comments, so share his knowledge, it is absolutely forbidden to delete this post. Therefore, it's kind of a collection of the shared knowledge, for example, translation in context, or some kind of help connected with freelance activities, or private interpretership in Poland, or some kind of even taxation things, problems and issues. Another rule concerns some problems, frequently repeated questions. You have to search for some already available answers and then to ask maybe new questions. It also means that conversation on the group board is conducted by users who are supposed to be aware of the fact of the public engagement. That's why I call it public solidarity in terms, social solidarity in this terms. Many other knowledge, many other experiences are shared, are connected with this experiences with contractors, translation agencies, sometimes individual clients. Sometimes they share also various good and bad experiences on an anonymous basis. just for the sake of mere sharing and feeling of mutual understanding. There is a separate subject that appears as an important source of conflicts, theory arguments, but at the same time sort of support. It concerns the current multiple law rates and in general the level of fair remuneration in this platformization of platformized type of work already, also despite of this knowledge required and many years of learning and practice. So many translators enthusiastically call for solidarity despite distinctive experience, despite different employment status. They explicitly share their regret about low rate offers shared by agencies, especially in an attempt to condemn this and these activities. What else? Maybe not to be too long in this. It is also interesting that many conversations started in this virtual communities focused on asking for support in various unconventional problems. For example, dealing with procrastination or strange client requests. So the research data show that altruistic help in this knowledge sharing usually comes from better mutual understanding among translators. So, like in a statement, "Oh, I know what you mean," and then when some translators running out of time and begging for quick help with some really simple translation problem, everybody, like not everybody, but those active members really share their knowledge in kind of and share their feelings with no focusing on problems. So in case of this virtual communities of translators and interpreters, one of the most important elements seems to be informal solidarity that presumes no formal connections or obligations that allow to feel sort of affiliation to a friendly community. Maybe it's not classic understanding of solidarity, but I think we have to take a look at this reality of our working life also from this point of view. So, especially in this age of remote work and disembeddedness from the local community, from the working community, such virtual community can offer atmosphere of mutual help, despite competition, despite competitive economic environment, despite social uncertainty and this pressure, especially that really grew during the pandemic. I think I will stop with this because it's too stressful for me to speak without my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Well, despite the technical issues, I think your presentation was very clear, very interesting on knowledge sharing practices among translators. Thanks so much. I guess we will have some questions to discuss later. And well, now it's Joshua Preiss' turn. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, all the organizers. This is an amazing event. I'm kind of floored by the logistics of all the different time zones and all the different tech, and it's been wonderful. Okay, so the title of my presentation today, I was going to talk a bit more about monopsony power, but in part due to time constraints, I decided to talk a bit more about decommodification in general and connected to, as Just had noted, to this. my book, which just came out in January. And so the title of the presentation is Just Work Through Decommodification. Okay. So in the book, and for both autobiographical and methodological reasons, in the book, I tend to focus on the American context, methodological based on my ideas of the relevance of context and thinking about the theory and practice of justice. But a lot of what I'm going to say will be sort of framed in the context of the contemporary United States. But a lot of the issues that I address are far from exclusively relevant in that context. Okay, so in the book, I make this distinction between two different ideas of equality and opportunity. One that I call fair race, which is a broadly meritocratic conception. So where justice is just a level playing field where rewards are proportionate to merit and effort, right? So everybody gets a fair shot. The politics of fair race, then the politics and policy of fair race focus on, policies directed at non-discrimination, maybe more equal educational opportunities and so on to sort of level the playing field. The other conception of equality and opportunity that I talk about in both of these conceptions, as I argue, it's a work, I call it a work of public philosophy. And by a work of public philosophy here, I mean, it's not just that it applies to public affairs, but that I engage with the relevant work in political science and sociology and what people actually care about with respect to economic justice, as well as sort of like central political and historical figures in that context. Anyway, both of these values play a central role in thinking about the American dream. They also find their way into prominent conceptions in political theory and in political philosophy of justice. So Just Work then borrows substantial sort of influence from Martin Luther King's work on the dignity of labor. But the basic idea here is that a just work society is one where people can exchange hard work for a middle class life. And this conception of middle class is not middle income, but rather it's a context relative normative standard, includes not just wages and access to basic or goods that people think are central to their ability to live a good life, but also to be able to relate to each other as free and equal, right? So when I talk about these two principles and I justify them and I articulate them, there's like a weaving together of both, again, the politics and the sociology and the public sort of discourse with work in political philosophy and political theory. Oh, and just in case anyone's interested in more on the book, last week actually I did it just came out, an interview on the New Books Network on the book. So I did an hour plus interview on that if you're interested in hearing more about it. Okay, so you have these two principles in mind, right? Both of these principles are central to American public philosophy. Both of these principles are held not just by people in the United States. They play important roles in theories of justice in general. So one question that a philosopher might ask then is, well, okay, well, how do you trade these off with each other? How do you Katya, I think you might want to mute. How do you decide, the different ways of implementing, right? So my way of thinking about how to, if you will, resolve tensions between these two is actually to do it contextually. Is to say that in some contexts, certain principles matter more than others. In some contexts, certain principles are fairly easily realizable. They don't require as much of a politics. They're not particularly relevant to the crisis of political economy and democratic legitimacy. And in other contexts, certain principles are much more important. Okay. So in the book that I describe a series of political and economic trends, again, focus on the United States, but again, not solely far from just a set of concerns in the United States. And I distinguish as a way of sort of bringing together a huge amount of work in economics and political economy. I distinguish between what I call a Smithian well-ordered society and a winner-take-all society. Smithian well-ordered, neither of these is, well, certainly I think a winner-take-all society by relatively few people's conception would be seen as an ideal, but a Smithian well-ordered society is not an ideal either. It's just a way of talking about a political and economic context where there is rapid and inclusive growth and where market-specific virtues, as Smith would put it, liberally rewarded. winner-take-all society then, and in the A, B, C, and D on the slide here, I talk about some sources of transformation from depending on which context you're talking about, but in a lot of wealthy democratic countries, broadly inclusive mid-century growth to slower growth that is increasingly winner-take-all. I won't talk about all of these sources perhaps today in the presentation, but a number of different ways in which American society, contemporary United States, but not just, is becoming increasingly winner-take-all society. That is, with slower economic growth and growth concentrated at the top. Okay, with these sort of organizing ideal types of political economy, then, which capture a wide range of political and economic trends. I think about then the two principles that we just talked about, namely fair race and just work. Now, in a broadly Smithian, well-ordered society, much of what people are concerned about with respect to just work, certainly not all, but much of what people are concerned about is more easily realizable, right? In the American context, for example, people born in the 40s, work by Raj Chetty and other economists, people born in the 40s had, better than a 90% chance, or it peaked at better than a 90% chance of doing better than their parents. People had reasonable hope that if they worked hard, if they put themselves through, they could get a better life for themselves and their family, right? Just work was more easily achievable. You had, built-in institutions that helped to a certain extent provide a countervailing power and concentrated interests, and so on, and I could go on and on, but right. So just work is more easily realizable. In that context, fair race, it makes sense for people concerned about the American dream, or people concerned about justice in general, to give emphasis on fair race, because in the American context, we had horrific injustices with respect to fair race. You had extremely gendered division of labor and gender hierarchies, racial oppression and hierarchies. It makes sense to focus, justice-minded folks to focus on fair race. In the context of a winner-take-all society, though, this fair race isn't going to capture much of what people are concerned about. But also there's going to be a kind of instability to, even if you put like the idealized, the perfect set of political and economic institutions to maximize fair race, or something close to it, the economics of winner-take-all societies, particularly when small differences in luck, or small differences in effort or skill lead to giant differences in rewards. In a context where the fruits of economic growth are largely concentrated and they're slower, right? This focus on fair race is going to ultimately still lead to a society where large segments of the population are left behind, have relatively reasonable, there's less hope for, future for the bulk of the population, and all sorts of other issues that I talk about in the book, including what happens when work disappears in communities and deaths by despair and so on. Okay, so in a contemporary political economy that's increasingly winner-take-all, we have more reason to give focus to just work. Okay, so what does it mean to give focus to just work then? And how does that connect to decommodification? Okay, well, one sort of quick way to break down the central components of just work as a principle of justice you could break it down into two basic categories, which are on the screen there. One, just work involves middle class compensation, right? It's a context relative, right? It's a fundamentally relational account of justice. The question is not so much about whether people get what they deserve in a kind of distribution neutral sense, but rather it reflects this idea that all work that contributes to society, all work that contributes to humanity has dignity and ought to be reflected in a certain set of rewards. This includes certain wages and access to basic goods like healthcare and educational opportunities, right? But it also has this broadly relational component, which is sometimes captured well by relational egalitarianism in contemporary political philosophy. And there's a substantial overlap here between certain neo-Republican conceptions and contemporary political philosophy. But broadly speaking, a just work society is one where where workers have a certain status. and are able to therefore relate to each other, but their fellow citizens, including employers, managers, in some sense is free and equal. Okay. Now, also in the book, I talk about a number of different strategies, both political and policy strategies for trying to, what it would mean to make just work a priority in the contemporary United States context. And I provide a wide range of policy proposals, a wide range of sort of things that people might focus on. In some ways, you might think of the list that I provide, and I'll talk about a few of these things, and then I'll move on to the decommodification-oriented ones in a bit. These different policy alternatives, my goal here, and I provide a lot of reasons in the book why I think this isn't a particularly helpful way of thinking about justice in theory and practice. My goal is not to provide a picture of an ideally just society, nor do I want to present a series of reforms which only make sense if you can achieve them all at once, a kind of like complete basket of reforms, but rather I want to provide a number of different alternatives, each of which that could become sort of the center of a sustained political movement rooted in the values that people actually care about in that context. That is, that people can look at principles and values that they care about, and that they can advocate for these concrete reforms, which may make society comparatively just with respect to just work, and don't depend on the other ones. There's a number of reforms I talk about, including tax law, industrial policy, international property law, much of what might be captured by Hirschman's distinction between exit and voice in terms of voice. So, perhaps reforms to corporate governance and ways to make collective bargaining more efficacious in the modern world. But a large segment of, a large set of the reform proposals that one might undertake in order to bring about just work in the contemporary political economy are essentially decommodification-oriented strategies. That is, strategies that that address both 1 and 2 on the slide there. That is, that in part by increasing worker bargaining power, make it easier for more of the population to exchange hard work for middle-class life. One way to do that, a central way to do that, is to make elements of a middle-class life not depend upon their bargaining power as well, right? So that is, if we make these basic goods like healthcare and so on not depend upon their bargaining power, that is to if you will, to a certain extent separate people's ability to achieve a middle class life from their marginal productivity in the contemporary world, you can further just work, right? But it also strategies that increase the voice and exit and bargaining power of workers tend to make it easier makes them more powerful, makes it easier for them to relate to each other as free and equal, mitigates domination. So, I talk about a number of sort of decommodification strategies. In the American context, one primary source of the decline in just work is our ridiculously inefficient healthcare system, which functions as a kind of wage suck for the rest of the economy. Right. All of my work takes seriously path dependence. Right. So there's a real challenge in any of these reforms, including reforming healthcare policy. You don't get to just create your ideal healthcare policy and apply it. All right. But anything that is able to further distinguish or to further separate access to healthcare from employment is likely to further just work, as long as it does so in a way that doesn't simply leave tens of millions of people without access to healthcare at all. But another policy that I talk about in the book, but I don't underline, and I'm increasingly seeing as something close to a first best, not policy, that is what might be a central source of a political movement oriented towards just work, is a federal jobs guarantee, because a federal jobs guarantee can address both 1 and 2 components, right? It's not, from the perspective of fair race, a federal jobs guarantee is not particularly important. From the perspective of fair race, decommodification itself doesn't seem to be that important to justice. What matters is everybody has a fair shot at achieving certain goods. But if the fundamental norm, the fundamental crisis of political economy, if the virtue or value that's most relevant in our context is just work, then decommodification becomes a central strategy. A federal jobs guarantee can, by tightening the labor market, as a number of economists have talked about, sometimes focusing on monopsony power, but for other reasons, can again make it easier for workers to achieve middle-class compensation, broadly speaking. But it also mitigates economic domination in the workplace, as people have quality middle-class options available that do not depend upon a given employer, and in fact may mitigate some of the frictions people have from moving from employer to employer, right? So decommodification is a central strategy for thinking about just work. I think I'll stop there and see if there's questions, and we can hopefully have further discussion. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks so much. Okay, so I guess now, if you have any questions to the speakers, maybe you can formulate them in the chat or in the Q&A sections. Otherwise, I will also ask some questions, and maybe we can open also we can start a discussion among the panelists, which I think would be also interesting. Of course, you have been presenting about very different things, but we are all united against commodification or too much commodification. So there's some space for dialogue here. Okay, so if no one is formulating a question, I would like to ask you, Katya, first. I hope we can hear you. Your answer. I would like to ask you about your study. Oh, are you there? Oh, she's not there.
I'll go ahead and field Katya's question. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, well, why not? Yes, well, maybe. Sorry, I need to improvise a lot because of these technical problems. Okay, so maybe I can also ask a question to Joseph about your study cases. You started your presentation talking about the legal status of being a volunteer, and then of course you talked about you presented about the self-understanding of volunteers, and I would like to ask you, what is the connection between the two aspects? So if your aim is to show that at some point that self-understanding should play a role in the legal status of volunteers, if there's something, what is the, again, so what is the contribution that your analysis and your study on self-understandings can make to rethinking the legal status of, if this makes sense at all? Yeah, so this would be the first question. Then I'll go back to Katya and then to Joshua, if nobody else has questions.
Yes, so that was one of the points of the presentation, to put into regards the legal status. Thank you for your question. And self-understanding of volunteering. I think I try to question the status of volunteering from the self-understanding, but also from the form of work, which is in which this status is mobilized. So one point is to say that for job seekers who are volunteering, they can perceive their volunteering as a work, as a way to access work. And another point is also to show that in some organizations, this status is mobilized as a substitute for work, for instance, in the hospital, because volunteering was clearly used to replace some employees, and for the civic service, it's in between. It's not volunteering, I mean pure volunteering, and it's not clearly a job. So yes, the point is to question the legal status from the self-understanding of volunteering and also from the form of the activity. Because both are related. So for instance, in the hospital, people, job seekers who perceive their activity as a work, they actually involve themselves full-time, and then their involvement started to be really near a normal work. You know what I mean? And for other people, for instance, for people who were integrated in the job market, for instance, who were just have a suspension of their contracts, or for instance, elderly who volunteer, for them, the crisis was the main motives of their volunteering, and then they volunteer just part-time, and the freedom for them was a very important dimension. So for them, it was not really as a normal job. So I think both are related: the self-understanding and the way people are doing volunteering. I don't know if this makes sense.
No,
I'm clear. Okay.
Yes, of course. Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, then I'll continue with my question to Katya then. I hope you don't disappear in the middle of the question. Well, I have actually two questions. I have also been working on what you were talking about knowledge sharing practices, and I've been writing on what I call epistemic practices, which really relates to your work. And so I'm very interested also in what you were explaining. I have two questions about this. The first question is, you were talking about relations of solidarity among translators, no? But of course, there is also, I guess, job scarcity among translators. So there must be also a feeling of competition among them, no? So the question is, did you see also competition at work limiting those knowledge sharing practices in some sense? So I'm asking you out of curiosity if you were able also to identify this logic of competition. Of course, one would think yes, but I would like to ask you this. And then the second question is, you said, well, this is not the kind of traditional solidarity that we find in trade unions and so on. These are different kind of solidarity. It's a solidarity. Sorry, I live next to a church, so you can hear the bells. It's a kind of solidarity that is also connected to the fact that there is not a physical space where they meet. But I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it has also to do with the fact that those workers, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, are also living under precarious conditions. So the question would be, would it be a solidarity among precarious workers? What would this mean exactly? You know, because I just attended another, well, I was the technical moderator of another panel in which they were talking about different forms of solidarity among riders, you know, and which also have a similar situation, because they don't have spaces where they can meet. They only have internet tools, but internet tools are also so give some opportunities for communication, but at the same time also can be controlled by the companies where they work, and so on and so on. So yeah, so these are the two questions. The first is, did you see the logic of competition also working there? And the second is, can you say a little bit more about this other form of solidarity that you could identify? Thanks.
Okay, so the first question concerns sort of, I think we can call it the term from the management studies.
Can you speak a little bit louder?
Competition.
A little bit louder?
So,
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know, it should work. I mean, we can use for this situation with translators, I think the term from management studies, that is competition. That is cooperation with competition, something, management studies scholars, they usually invent something that, that is really very much into economy or sociology, but still it's something new. And the problem, I think, the competition element maybe is revealed in their manifestation of knowledge. So there are really a couple of dozens very active translators, maybe interpreters also, but we are talking about writing, right? So translators that show that they know specific answers. They can, I don't know, read the handwriting and help with translation. They know elements concerning private enterprises and taxation and so on, but especially they know the language. So this is it seems to me that it's sort of public relations activities also, on this micro scale, on this freelance level, as it seems to me. In general, I think they just appreciate being among the similar people. And to the second question, as to precarity, and I'm not sure if they are aware that their situation is in fact precarious, because most of them try to. I mean, I don't have really all the statistics, so I was just observing the trends and the qualitative study, but still, many of them. I mean, they combine different types of work, and they just try to make all newcomers aware that unless you fight for fair rates for translation, you will become, ever volunteering, right? So, like, in connection with the previous one of the previous speakers, Joseph, right? So there are several formal organizations, especially concerning sworn translators. These translators that are connected with this, licenses from Ministry of Internal Affairs. But no formal organization for everyone, sort of, union, right? And maybe this is the way they can fight, the struggle with the slow rates, and also, for example, excluding advertisements, because this community also, for looking for a job, excluding advertisements where there are no rates. This is the way to control the situation. If I have a word, may I have some sort of maybe just I don't know, additional information or something to Joseph's presentation, if you hear me. At the moment, I'm doing some research also on other type of community. In fact, developers community. We call it ITV, information scientists, information technology volunteers in Russia, in connection with civil society organizations or non-governmental organizations. There is such a community, very vibrant community that connects developers, designers, UX designers, various types of computer professionals with representatives of NGOs, and they have a lot of things, starting from web page creation to fundraising to designing advertising campaigns for everything for the sake of civil society and all those civic activities and help. So now we're on the stage of checking their motivation. These are people who are really highly paid, as computer, as information technology professionals usually are. And they have, so far, their main motivation that is revealed in the interviews and also in the questionnaires is their desire to do something for civil society that is, in Russia at the moment is really in a difficult situation. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. If there are no further comments, I would like to ask a question to Joshua Preiss. Let me check the Q&A. Okay, so I will just ask my question. Joshua, thank you so much for your presentation. I think I really want to read your book now, and I'm really afraid I won't make any very interesting question, but maybe I can try. You distinguish between these two principles, not two principles, two understanding of justice. You talked about fair race, meritocracy, and you talk about just work, and you seem to connect them to two different, let's say, how to say, episodes of the U.S. American history, and it seems that now just work could be the strongest, or the focus of the American public philosophy now is directed towards just work. But what about meritocracy? I mean, what is the role of meritocracy in the U.S. Right now? What role does it play? Is it still in the back? How is it articulated with the other principle? This is my first question, and then maybe you can follow up. Yeah.
No, that's good. Thanks for helping me clarify there too. I mean, in a way, the book is a caution for continuing to focus on meritocratic, or certainly to the exclusion, or the failure to have a politics that addresses just work because it's either centered on meritocracy or it believes the status quo is something like a meritocracy, right? So, Mike, when I say that just work has become most important, I don't mean it's most captivated our politics. Rather, it's a principle that captures widespread beliefs about how market societies ought to look, widespread beliefs about what work should be like. It also captures a lot of the what I might call a sort of crisis of contemporary political economy. This widespread sense of hopelessness in different contexts, and what Ann Case and Angus Deaton have called deaths by despair from suicide and opiate use. Right, it's a value that needs to be the center of a political coalition, but in fact, it's changing, and people are starting, particularly after there was a kind of like post-Trump movement in the academia to understand, as well as in the Democratic Party to give more attention to just work. But the book is written in the context where people are focusing on meritocracy in a way that's not going to address these fundamental issues, right? So the point is not that people are giving attention to just work now, and that's what we need to do. They are comparatively, but also that the concerns captured by this principle of justice are the most compelling, need to be given a kind of priority, both because of a variety of things that I just talked about, but also because even if you think as many people claim to anyway, that a just society is just one where everyone gets a fair shot, right? So there's all sorts of different conceptions of American public philosophy. There's all sorts of conceptions of justice in political philosophy that essentially says that a just society is one that gives people what they deserve or neutralizes good or bad luck or what have you, removes barriers to success for people can realize their talents, a wide range of different views, right? Even if you think that something like fair race is just what justice is, and you don't see just work as compelling independently. The politics and economics of a winner-take-all society militates against fair race, right? In a winner-take-all economy where, small difference, where one, slower growth, but also small differences lead to small differences in luck and even virtue, if you want to say it, networks, skill, whatever, lead to these giant differences of reward, and large segments of the population are left behind. Right, the people who win a fair race society are going to win a lot, and they're going to use their resources to undermine fair race going forward. Right, and in fact, a winner-take-all economy gives them all sorts of basic incentives to do, what sometimes is called opportunity hoarding. Right, so a winner-take-all economy sort of engenders opportunity hoarding, and so even if your only concern is fair race, in order to make fair race an ongoing in order to make the fair race a reality over time, you have to give important attention in the present context to just work, right? Because the politics and economics of fair race militates against a winner-take-all economy militates against fair race. So even if you believe it's just a level playing field where rewards are proportionate to merit and effort, you still have all sorts of reasons to try and make hard work more easily translate into a middle-class life. Because when it does, people have far less incentive to opportunity hoard, and I write a lot about also sort of, if you will, the moral psychology of a just work society is one that's more conducive for people acting according to their values, including if their values are fair race, and so on and so forth. So it's in a context really where I'm saying is like, look, these are both central principles. I'm not going to tell people that they're wrong principles, but in this particular context, whichever one of them you hold, you need to give more attention to the sorts of things captured by just work. Good. Very good question. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good answer. Thanks. Okay, so any other concerns, any other questions you would like to discuss? Maybe among panelists, you might be curious about each other's work, or we still have 15 minutes, but if there's nothing else if we don't need to spend them, we can stop here if you want. Just giving you a last opportunity.
Maybe I can add something. Just in relation to the question you asked me, and to what I said earlier, just to precise that that my objective is to question a legal framework based on the way in which people perceive their activity. But I think this is just one objectives. But the objective is also to question what work is based on the way in which these kind of activities outside the employment are perceived. I think that the way people relate to their involvement and their volunteer involvement in this case says a lot about their way to perceive the work, which is expressive before then being instrumental, and the importance that work takes as a primary concern for unemployed people before they can relate to their engagement, involvement on the basis of political values, for instance. It was just to precise compared to my previous answer. Thank you.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. That helps. Well, okay, then if there are no further questions, we can just stop here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentations. It was really inspiring. And it's a pity that the fourth our fourth panelist couldn't show up. She comes from Brazil. Maybe let me just say a few words about her. Her name is Raquel Azebedo, and she's a member of a trade union. Here, the translation is Precarious Workers Trade Union, but actually the Portuguese name is more interesting. It's called the Association Against. Association. Well, it's difficult to translate from Portuguese into English, but let me just try. Association for Struggle Against Precarity, Inflexible Precarious, which is kind of well, she's a leader of this, and it would have been very interesting to know about her experience. We have had already a few interesting panels on precarious work, and that I think could have also made could have also added to the diversity of perspectives in this panel. It's a pity that she's not here, but I just wanted to make her visible in the panel. Okay, so thanks again, and have a nice rest of the forum.
Thank you. Have
Bye-bye.
a great day.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice day.